Well, good. Hey, so Mark, I'm going to throw this next one to you, and my question was, now the CNO is also warning of increased aggressive Chinese and Russian behavior that undermines the international rules-based order. But the part that I think we missed on the first question was erosion of credible military deterrence. So maybe if you can cover both of those, and clearly I've got the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in my head, but certainly I think Jerry and Danelle did a good job of kind of framing the challenge that we're seeing from China. But let's kind of look at international rules-based order and military deterrence.
Sure. So it's going to be I'll build on everything that Jerry and Danelle talked about. So I want to key on one word first: increasing aggressive behavior. So anyone that operates in the Mediterranean theater or the North Sea theater or the South China Sea theater has been seeing aggressive behavior from our adversaries at a constant pace. What's different now is that it's becoming much more visible, and they don't care. There isn't much we can do in the international world, international courts, international forums that we participate in, to tell the story about what our adversaries are doing in theater. They're conducting operational tests is what they're doing every day. And so the things we do see that are visible to the U.S., the public, imagine what's under the waterline that you don't see. Danelle just talked about some of that. The things that are going on in China in terms of building up a robust infrastructure that will allow them to do things in very insidious and covert ways. Those are the things that are hard to take forward to the international tribunes and other forums that allow us to say, hey, they're placing our aircrew at risk or our ship's crews at risk by doing something with their navigation system, as an example. Cyber is a very, very insidious thing. We can just make it off by 30 degrees. We could run adrift somewhere. We could do things to our weapons and their accuracy. So what I want to make sure you take away from this forum is, yeah, we're seeing balloons. We're seeing tactical aircraft pulling high-G maneuvers while dumping gas near and around one of our drones that literally resulted in that drone being lost because, oh, by the way, as you fly that very aggressive maneuver, you're creating a wake that particular asset can't manage. Now, was it on purpose or did they make a mistake? Anybody have a guess? I think I can guess. So again, how do we take that kind of behavior, that aggressive behavior? By the way, that has been going on for years. I have seen the faces of Chinese pilots next to aircraft I've been in. I've seen their faces well inside of any safe bubble that they should be flying in. What do we do with that? So that bold behavior, which has been going on for years, is what I call conditioning. They've been conditioning us to behave in a certain way, and we're allowing it to occur. So we're going to talk about this in a few minutes when we talk about systems, technologies that we need to bring to bear to manage these challenges. But I think everybody in this room needs to take away, when you're watching on CNN or Fox or whatever the local station you're watching is, and you see a balloon that's floating over our international airspace, our sovereign airspace, that's just the very, very, very top level of what's really going on in theater. They do not follow the rule of what we would consider be international law with regard to safety of our folks that are operating at risk in theater, both in a tactical and a strategic sense. It should concern every single one of us, and us in industry should be very aware of what they are doing and what are the technologies, like what we're going to talk about today with Spectral, that gives our ship's company the access to decision information they need to deal with what I just described, that insidious behavior. And you could put it in the aggressive category if you like, but it doesn't necessarily have to be aggressive. It could be happening right now. Out.
Yeah, no, I think there's a credible case that you've all made with regard to the hubris that we're facing across the world. We've kind of haven't hit the first threat that the CNO speaks to, which is the erosion of credible military deterrence. And I think, Mark, you were starting to get at it with what we need to put in place and where we're going with it. But Mark or anybody else, if you want to tackle that, Herb, jump in.
So, you know, I think one of the observations that I would make is when I was starting out and doing sub work, it was understood that we had a threat, and the programs were directed at muting that threat. And I'm not sure if we're quite there yet in this case. I'm not sure if we've pivoted. But one of the comments, it was kind of back to the AIML. From a policy perspective, we're not able to collect the data that is required to do some of the things that you'd want to do some of the matching that you'd want to. The AIML models that the Chinese are able to build are based on their unfettered access to collecting data and exploiting that data. And we just don't have that paradigm. We certainly don't have it in cyber. That's something that, you know, has been argued for 20 years. We just don't have it. We can't connect those dots because we're not allowed to put those dots together. Chinese don't have that problem. And so it's a tough adversary when we tie one hand behind our own back.
So Todd, so credible deterrence. It depends on the domain, right? So for us in this discussion, I think it's really important for us to understand that we do have credible deterrence in several domains. The challenge is they're not interlaced. We do not have a distributed architecture that is tied together in a coherent way that allows us to very rapidly ingest information from multiple sensors, process it in a very, whether we use some sort of a machine learning or some sort of a AI capability to ingest the large, for us to be credible, we're going to have to ingest a large amount of information and make sense of it very quickly so that decisions can be made in the battle space to deploy the right integrated fires. And when I say integrated fires, I mean kinetic and non-kinetic. Whether it's cyber or electronic attack, RF attack, or whatever it is, or some sort of a kinetic in-game.
So now it comes back to the IoT discussion, which is how do you make sure you have the integrity of the data that's coming off of that IoT machine, right? You know, you collect all of this data, but how do you source it? How do you ensure that it hasn't been tampered with in flight?
And I'll just add to that, when it comes to cybersecurity data, companies need to be thinking about as they sell products to the U.S. government in any capacity, how you're making those zero trust compliant, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology 800 Tech 207. Zero trust means essentially that you're protecting the data. We used to think of perimeter defense, right? A moat around your castle, right? You put all your intrusion detection, your firewalls, your routers, that was the moat, the water around the castle. That was how we protected. Now we want to see the guy going in and out of the castle. What is that guy doing? That's zero trust, essentially, right? I don't trust that person to do anything. I don't trust them to access the data, or if it's a system, I don't trust that system's data. So you have to look at how when you're selling things to the government and proposing things to the government, whether it's Spectral or anything else, how are you protecting the data from start to finish in the DevSecOps process as a continuous monitoring, continuous improvement thing, and then protecting at the data element layer, whether that's through SAML tags or something else, whatever data format you're using, and then polymorphic encryption and encrypting data en route, and then the perimeter defenses. It's the whole shebang. And you have to show how you're really compliant with zero trust, how you're getting your products and services there, because that's what the DoD and the U.S. government really need with their weapon systems and their IT systems and OT systems too.
Yeah, especially the OT systems.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so all four of you have had fantastic careers in government, and you are now either in industry or have recently been in industry and working through that. So what are you seeing industry developing in terms of advanced EW, SIGINT, and cyber technologies to strengthen deterrence and enhance our ability to campaign forward and build enduring advantage? So Mark, let's start with you, and I think all four of you will see where you're going with this.
Yeah, so my realm is the RF realm. That's where I've lived my whole career, and that's where I am now. So we are very, very focused on our adversaries are using the RF spectrum to do things that traditionally we have been trained, and we've built all of our eWeir databases and so on, the collections we've done for years, to manage and deal with. Well, they're using frequency ranges to do modes of operations that they've never done before because they've figured out how to do the processing through digital means. So what we're looking at is you've got to get to a physics-based approach. You cannot rely on building a library or a mission data file any longer. We have got to get to 360 degrees, instantaneous bandwidth with a very high dynamic range and a level of sensitivity that allows you to ingest everything that hits the aperture and then deal with it. That means you have to have an open architecture. That means you have to be able to make changes on the fly to threats you haven't seen before. Focusing on hardware as an initial instantiation of whatever it is that you're building, and then be able to upgrade it through firmware. I mean, the technology's there. I can update firmware now and change the parameters with which the system is looking at the world. I need to be able to very quickly, at the tactical edge, deliver change through software or firmware to a ship that's deployed that sees a threat that we've never seen before. And that threat is consumed because it's a physics-based approach. Everybody with me on that? Okay.
I like it. I'm going to go over here to Jerry, and then we're going to go to Danelle, and I'm going to come back to you, Herb, from a commercial perspective on open and software-based solutions. So, Jerry?
Yeah, I think Mark's hit the nail on the head. We previously, years ago, had tremendous advantage in our processing capabilities, digital signal processing, et cetera. But we're an open society, and it's somewhat easy to, not easy, but it's done all the time, industrial espionage to steal things and to use that to develop their systems, and they've certainly done that. So it's a big challenge for us to continue to invest to stay ahead of that curve, because it's a race. And whereas we used to have years of advantage, and that went into the CNO's credible deterrence, we no longer have that. So, it makes it that much more challenging for you as industry to continue to develop those new technologies and techniques, and most importantly, to keep it safe. So I think that has to be a thrust for everyone in this audience.
Yeah, very much.
Thank you.
Danelle?
Yeah, a couple things I'll add. So as you know, the Navy has a really unique operating environment. We're over-reliant on radio frequency for everything still. It's an Achilles heel.
It's cool.
It's cool if you're the Chinese and you can attack it, right? But for years we know we need an alternative. We need an alternative to space-based systems. We need an alternative to RF-based systems. We need free space optics, frankly, to give us the high data rate and the cybersecurity, the security to do things at a lower level. I want to be on an aircraft carrier and be the strike group commander and launch off unmanned vehicles that can extend my line of sight and my range of both my weapons and my C2 thousands of miles by hopping to other platforms via lasers. And where the lasers, I'll be honest with you, the free space optics, much harder to interfere with. You can do it, of course, but much harder to interfere with than in EW. You can do it at a standoff range that's way different. And the Chinese are getting increasingly, as they talked about, sophisticated on both offensive and defensive EW operations. I want a ship that has zero RF emissions. That includes the internal network. Why are we not putting light fidelity Li-Fi on our ships? Why are we even looking at 5G RF? I want a ship that emits no RF, because even the smallest signature will be able to be picked up by adversaries that are capable like the Chinese in the future. Why give them that opportunity? So we really have to invest in those. And the problem we don't is, one, because we don't understand our architecture in terms of the data in the context of the architecture and in context of the transport, how we need to move it around. And because we don't have a really good understanding of our data architecture for weapon systems, OT, and IT, then and all these unmanned systems that are popping up all over, then we really can't develop a good transport architecture with alternatives like free space optics to do something about that. So it's a tough problem. It's a problem we've had forever, and it just seems to be something DoD can never get their arms around.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And at CACI, we're in fact one of the U.S. leading providers of free space optics. And we're doing fantastic things, but getting it into the fleet and getting it into operation is a daunting endeavor in terms of testing and then getting to the operational doctrine to do that. So Herb, with that, we've heard lots of discussions about open architectures and software-based solutions. Why are those the key to tomorrow's EW, SIGINT, and cyber capabilities?
I think that it's the mission enabler that people have been asking for. It's the baseline for being able to deploy systems that have just been described. You know, from Dell's standpoint, we've focused for the last year on Zero Trust as a destination for our infrastructures and making sure that we're going to comply with the advanced Zero Trust architecture that's been put out by the DoD CIO. I think that the trick with that, and you know, we should get that done this year, but the trick with that is the ability to have it assessed to make sure that it actually complies with the intention. Because if it doesn't comply with the intention, it's not useful and it will not be deployed. And so, you know, that's our focus. I think from there, the way that I look at it from a commercial perspective is once you have that infrastructure, you then want to have, quote, a marketplace, an active marketplace where people can develop comm solutions between the data centers, where people can develop multi-factor authentication for APIs, because that's a gaping hole. All the OT things that you want to do are humbled by the fact that you're going to make an API connection back to your infrastructure that's not controlled in any way. And so, you know, again, I think kind of multiple steps. You need that core enabler that secures the data, allows you to have data integrity, complies with the guidance from NIST, NSA, DoD, and the like. And then from there, you have to have, I think that's where the openness comes from. You have to have a marketplace where people can start with that baseline, experiment, evolve, and be agile in what they bring to mission.
And what's inhibiting that? I mean, what's fundamentally different between what you see in the commercial side and what you see happening within the government, and what do we need to do about it?
It's the wow, I'm going to get in trouble now. It's the willingness to comply, right? I mean, you've got a standard. The government built this, so the government built a standard. They've been talking to Dell about that for quite some time. Dell signed up. We signed up with a variety of partners. We signed up. Within the government, if I go, I'm going to pick on somebody else, Army PEO, they'll argue with me. We don't want to do that. I'm like, well, okay. You know, we're not the ones telling you to do it, but we're going to build it for you and provide it to you. So, you know, the whole idea with open, when you look at Apple was a closed system, but what they did do was make sure that they knew exactly what was going on their platform, and they forced adherence to that, and there were no exceptions. Well, the government's not willing to do that with itself. And so, you know, I think that it's a sprawling enterprise. The DoD is massive. You've got all kinds of use cases, the most massive IoT environment in the world. You've got all these DDoS situations where people go off and operate autonomously for a while. By the way, I don't fit on a submarine, just so you know. But you operate autonomously, then you come back and you have to, you know, replicate and catch up, and so it's an incredibly complicated environment. And yet, if there was a baseline that people were willing to adhere to, so I mean, I worked FedRAMP way back when, which was supposed to replace FISMA, which was supposed to. But that to me was a step towards saying, this is what it should look like if you're going to have a cloud, and now you have the ability to put applications on it, and that growth was really rapid.
Yeah.
Let's do the same thing with the secure infrastructure, and then you can just start building on top of that. But it's the willingness to comply.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I think it's been a pleasure working with each of the companies that you represent from the standpoint of coming together with modern software practices, working towards an open architecture and having an agnostic, best-in-class, any-source type of approach. And, you know, that's really what we need to aspire to for any of this joint new brave world, and to, if you look to China as the reference threat to achieve parity with what they're doing out there.
Well, they comply, it was mentioned before.
They complied, or else.
That's right.
Fair enough. So I'm going to go off script here, guys, because we've got a great audience here. I want to give you guys a chance to ask all these experts their thoughts on stuff, and I've got a couple of questions here that we'll fall back on, or I've been known to pick on folks in the audience as well. So let's see if we can get some questions out of you all.
Do you mind if I make
for
a
these
couple
folks.
comments just real quick on emerging technology, real quick before we start? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment and have you think about it a little bit. How many people were here last year for this discussion? Anybody? A couple. Okay. We're going to do just a real quick nerd game here, okay? And so I want you to put your hand in the air if you have more than one computing device, a telephone, a router, whatever. Keep those hands up high. We're going to find out who the biggest nerd in the room is, okay? More than 2, more than 3, 4, 5, 6, hands still up, 7, 8, our nerds are emerging, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, the nerd off, 15, 16.
Sold.
Sold. How many got? 25 in his basement. He never leaves his mom's basement. No, 25. That's right. No, I'm with you.
Mining crypto, I bet.
Yeah, but he's got a bit mining it. 25. If I'd asked that question 10 years ago, you'd have been the cool kid with the flip phone, right? What has changed about the technology? What has changed is it's exponentially accelerating and converging technology. The convergent point of technology is where you find true transformation, right? There's a lot of interesting technology out there, a lot of novel technology. But for your businesses, you need futurists, you need people who can see where that convergent point brings transformation, right? You know, when Henry Ford was asked about his cars, he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, because they can't see the art of the possible, right? And businesses who get it, who get digital modernization, who get those convergent points, are the ones who are going to succeed. They will be the Netflix in the Blockbuster world. You don't want to be Blockbuster, right? Don't wish away the technology, embrace it. And so when you look at the CEO of Levi's who says, I'm a software company who sells jeans, let that sink in, right? That's the CEO saying that. So when we talk about those convergence of technology, let me give you an example. Electric car, autonomous vehicle, and ride-share services like Lyft or Uber. Unless you were German, 5 years ago, you never heard of Uber unless everything was Uber fantastic, right? Now everybody's got Uber, you probably Ubered here today, right? So you take that decimated a whole industry, a taxi industry in New York City, right? It changed the way that whole industry did business. Secondly, the unmanned vehicle. We've had unmanned vehicles for a while, but now they're coming all over. In 2015, I was in Mountain View, and they're testing the Google card. It actually pulled up at the light next to me. There's 2 dudes in the back seat, no steering wheel, nobody in the front seat, and they drove off. And that was in 2015. The electric car had been around for a long time, right? It just started taking off with Prius and Tesla and all this other stuff. Now it's a fact of life. Each of those was transformational in among themselves, but now you converge those 3 things together, and what do you get? You get me waking up in the morning, going to work in the soul-crushing Pentagon, and I don't have to have a car. Kids born today will never own or learn how to drive a car. In the future, I will wake up, get ready to go to the Pentagon, I'll walk outside my door, and there'll be something waiting for me there, a car, a hovercraft, whatever. It's going to take me to work, scan the RFID tag in my head or my arm, and charge my bank $2 for that ride. And if I need to go to the airport, based on my heuristics, what I do every day, if I need to go to the airport that day, I'm going to say, no, I need to go to the airport, and it's going to charge me an extra $3 and take me over to Reagan. That's the world we're living in. And if you don't think that affects your industry, think again. And I'll just give you one more example real quick, but I went to my niece's husband, owns a dairy farm in upstate New York, right? And I'm like, oh, that's so cute. I want to go see him milk the cows, right? So I said, hey, can I come over and see the cow milking thing going on? They're like, yeah, sure, come on over. They have 800 cows. Not a single human touches those cows during the day. What happens is Bessie's udder gets full. She walks up to the barn, and there's 4 robots there. She pulls up to a robot. The little lasers check her teats, and the Fitbit up here tells them what she ate yesterday, how much she pooped, what the temperature is, all that kind of stuff, how much milk she gave. It cleans her teats. It milks her. The whole time she's getting this super rich treat like a cow Snicker bar or something, which would make me want to go there. And then, as soon as it's done, cleans her and shoots her out. And if she tries to be slick and come back in and get another Snicker bar, it knows she was just there and kicks her out. I kid you not, every industry is being affected by this. And if you don't think your industry is, you need to think twice. And the other piece I would say is those technologies that you need to be mindful of, in my opinion, are the ones that will be those transformational points where you'll get convergence and true transformation, and think of how these will affect your industries, are quantum computing, IoT, unmanned vehicles, hypersonic weapons. You might not need that at work unless you're working in DoD. AI and battery chip technology and cybersecurity. And the one I'll just say a couple comments about and then we'll turn it over is artificial intelligence. If you haven't been watching what's going on with generative artificial intelligence, you need to. This is the car, this is the computer, this is the iPhone. This is a convergence of technologies point. Your organizations will be blockbuster in a Netflix world if you don't have a deliberate strategy about how you're going to implement your products using that. You can't wish it away. And those guys, Elon Musk and Wozniak and the 1,500 scientists who just put out a, hey, let's put a pause on all AI experimentation over the next 6 months, that horse is out of the barn. And your adversaries and competitors economically and militarily like China don't give a rat's patoot about that thing. They're going to go and move out, and you have to be ready. Pull down the NIST AI risk management framework that came out in January of this year. See what your company's CTO, CIO, CISO, and everybody else is doing about that, how you're going to integrate that into your products. And just be aware, there's a big push to regulate this. You know, regulation in an industry where technology is moving at such a rapid, accelerating, exponentially accelerating rate doesn't work. They tried to, I'll give you an example, they just tried to regulate email. Back in 1986, Congress passed a law about keeping more than 180 days worth of email.
All right, let's rein it back in. I'm gonna grab the wheel on the Jetsons car
My
here.
point is you can't regulate that. That law's still on the books. You can't regulate it.
But I mean, I think you see lots of passion up here, certainly experts in the field and concern. But let's take the future state and let's bring it back to Admiral Gilday's navigation plan, and let's see if we've got about 20 minutes left to have some questions from the audience. I'm going to throw it back to you all and see what we have. So who's got some questions for us? Sir.
Hey, OpNav M98, just wondering if you could maybe just expound on the idea of investments in EW paying dividends and survivability at the tactical aircraft level.
Yeah, so, wow. I'm going to talk to you later. So we have been talking about investments in electronic warfare for years. Every time we get the bright shiny object idea, we're going to go invest in an EW. We get, to Herb's point, we're told, we want you to build X. Okay, we're going to build X. You give us a set of requirements. Those requirements take 2 years to fully bloom. We start building things. We built what you asked us to build, and the threat changed. It changed exponentially. We just got through talking about the pace of threat change. They're moving to a digital world. We need you to ensure you're giving us requirements that are outpacing the change that we're experiencing. You need to work with industry to define what survivability means. Is it a CCA? Is it a real airplane with a human being inside of it? Is it a weapon? What is it? We need clarity in requirements. And the clarity also means flexibility. You need to be able to tell us to build a system. That's what we're trying to do, quite frankly, by going to microservices in our software. Trying to go to open systems with third-party application availability. This idea of building an open modular architecture that's framed by requirements that we've been given. And that requirement set drives the budget. We need the budget. We need you to fund us. And as things evolve, we need to make sure we're having clarity of dialogue about, hey, we just heard about this new gonculator that the Chinese just started using in theater that does X. We didn't catch that one. What are we going to do? Well, the contract, so I'm sorry, folks. This is a lot of scar tissue I've had as both my government role as a PEO and now my role in industry. The contracts limit what we can do. Write the contracts so that we can change what you're asking us to do on the fly. The Chinese are not contracting, and they're not on a 2-year budget cycle either.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
sorry.
There's no color of money.
Sorry.
Well said. I think, my response to that too would be, the state of technology is such that we can do so much more in software, and with smart hardware designs, we can field and build systems to adapt, get them qualified, and then allow us to naturally evolve as the threat changes. And we're still in a world where DoD 5000 is a hardware-based world, and we're not thinking through what that implication might mean, and I think China's playing it a different way.
Danelle mentions DevSecOps, right? And this idea, I just said it and I'll say it again. Software coding today allows us to do microservices in a way that we can actually code a specific attribute of the system, a specific attribute. That means that I could go find somebody and say, hey, I need you to give me more of X, and go put it on the market, and then have them provide us with the microservice.
Yep.
That's not where we are today. Sorry.
But that goes back to, that microservices architecture has to run in some environment.
Yes.
And so now you have this question of, what's my system, right? What do I get accredited? Can I get the infrastructure accredited and then rapidly change what runs within that without having to go back and get a separate accreditation? So, there are a couple of different things that have to happen in concert to achieve that kind of environment. But we lose if we don't achieve that kind of environment.
Can I add,
But
about 5 years ago on that topic?
Well, I'm going to close on, we got to line up a question.
Oh, okay, all right, but the Navy is doing that with Operation Software Overmatch Armory. They're doing that
Yeah.
specific thing that
Great.
he's talking about.
Let's try to maybe rapid fire through this, because we got about 10 minutes left, but let's go, ma'am, to you, please.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm hoping this is a good question.
We can't hear you. Can you step closer to the mic?
What way, if any, might China be using the,
Just step closer, yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm hoping this is a good question. In what way, if any, might China be using TikTok to gather military intelligence on us?
So the question was, how might China be using TikTok to gather military intelligence?
I mean, I admit I'm ignorant about TikTok, but I'm wondering if that's maybe a channel that they use.
I mean, so China, what happens is TikTok is a Chinese-owned company. Any Chinese-owned company, by their law, the data that go through that system get routed through China, and then they have control over the data. So they can use the data for whatever they want, good or bad. I mean, China can do that.
90% of attacks are using users to enter into the system. Hackers don't break in, they just assume somebody's identity. So the fact that TikTok
Gateway.
collects a lot of identity information would make it a high-risk activity.
Yeah, it's a gateway. It's another gateway for them to access, and it's a way for them to influence Americans in a big way. But gathering military intelligence, not directly, but indirectly.
Yeah, and I'd say it's a very relevant question in today's world, and I think you heard all 4 of our panelists speak to the fact that data is more important than ever, and that the Chinese have different rules, and I think TikTok may be one of those nexuses where they may be applying those rules.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see, do we have another question over here? Oh, I thought we had a lineup over there. We'll go, well, good. One more, there we go.
Hi, John Lawrence and Zener Incorporated. And I have just an observation, really, and I think it applies more to this group probably than any other group, and especially for Navy. Standards are great. When some communities of practice get a standard imposed upon them, a weapons system developer, sensor manufacturer, I want to see Spaceballs at 1 million miles, right? Or the marshmallow balloon at 2 million miles. And that comes with a bunch of standards. Operationally, and the way the contracts are often written, the standards become a ceiling of capability and not a floor, because they're going to deliver that missile further, faster, better resolution to the same threshold standard. So when you're trying to counter effects, I think that's something that, you have to kind of gauge how survivable is my system. Yeah, I can see Spaceballs at 1,000,000 miles, but for how long in active combat? And so I would just caution that as you build proposals, as you build specifications, as you have specifications levied on you, that there's a priority for, yeah, this is a threshold specification. We're not going to buy it unless you meet this. But how often do you take those specifications and make those a discriminator between providers? Because I think we're getting a lot more ceiling activity from specifications in the cyber and E-cube domain than we are
Yeah.
reaching for the STARS requirements.
So I would agree with you, and I think the way that we've approached it over the last 2 years is not looking for a contract, but trying to build a relationship. And in building that relationship in a constant interaction, yes, we have to invest, but it allows us to innovate very rapidly. And, this is IRAD, but basically the focus is on what's the relationship that we can have with the government as a private actor that allows us to help move the mission forward. And then we'll figure out the contract once we've figured out what the innovation is. Because it's, as you were saying, it's very difficult to innovate under the contract. It's much easier to innovate and then present that as a 60% solution and then figure out how to close the gap. So it's not so much about contracts for me, it's more about what's the relationship, do I understand the mission problem, can I get my company to see it as a commercial activity as well, secure some investment, and then move forward. So it's a relationship, not a contract.
So I have to say, we are experiencing right now something I've not seen before, and it's different than what you described. Right now, the government is working with us at a system level to determine where we can find lifting the ceiling, so to speak, right? Getting ready, does that standard make sense? And so those things are happening now that didn't happen just 4 or 5 years ago when I was in the PEO. So I think that the government is doing a much better job in that particular realm, at least in my experience, okay? I don't want to, that's a blanket statement, I apologize, but my experience, the government has been very, very willing to work with us to raise the ceiling where we say, you're artificially limiting what we can give you by imposing this specific standard. And when they know, because of the partnership, they accept it. They either waive it through an engineering activity or, I almost got cut off, that was scary. Quite frankly, I think that the government is trying to change that behavior. But it's up to us in the industry to do that.
Push it.
Right? I mean, we have to do that. We have to know our system well enough to say, you just imposed this requirement on me, you've just limited our ability to give you another 12 dB, right? All right.
Yeah, all the stuff you were just talking about, it implies a certain level of trust. The contract is the contract. The effective industry government teams that can reach and strive for the next level are the ones that have developed a level of trust among each other. And, it's not, hey, you're going to screw me if you deviate from the contract by an inch. If you could develop that trust, and it takes work and it takes some time, the team together can achieve a lot more.
One more thing, and Todd, I hope this is a good, so all those companies at the bottom of that chart right there, that's a consortium of companies that are bringing best of breed to a product solution, right?
Yeah.
How often is that happening? So I talked earlier about, tying things together in a coherent way. This is how you do it. It's an example of how you could do it. Out.
Yeah, no, thanks, everybody. So I'm gonna take a little liberty here with the last question, and maybe I'm gonna bring it up a bit higher, but with the collective experience up here, I think, is appropriate. So finally, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give the CNO when it comes to his challenge of get real, get better? Who wants to jump in?
Well, one thing I'll say, it's been the problem forever, is we get in our own way with our regulations. You know, China doesn't wait on our palm cycle. They don't care. So we have to make, you know, people who are in this most senior leadership positions, they're the only ones who can fix those really hard problems. Don't just go after the low-hanging fruit and make incremental change. There needs to be a massive overhaul in how we do the palm. There needs to be a massive overhaul in how we do acquisition. And we've been talking about that forever. And it doesn't get done because it's really hard. Yeah, okay, it's really hard. Get to work. That's what you're paid for. That's why you're 4 stars and 3 stars and 1 stars and 2 stars, right? That's why
And
you're
I thought I was
in
in
leadership.
trouble.
Or, you know what I mean? I mean, seriously, it has to be done at that level.
Fair, fair. Let's go to you.
You know, I think that, I don't want to get in any more trouble. I think that, I'm just going to go with an anecdote. I was on Chat GPT last night and asking it to write a contract, and it can. You ask it what FAR clauses are responsible for a certain thing, you know, that should save some money and some time. Let's use that to figure out how we can be more agile. No, I mean, the one that I would go back to is that we've got to get to a place where there's compliance on the DevSecOps and on the infrastructure, because you're just not going to be able to innovate fast enough unless you know that what you built in one arena can move to another, and that you don't have to, we keep building capability from the ground up with all the attributes that we want, and that is highly inefficient. What we need to do is decide on a layer that allows you to have that assurance and then build on top of it, and that's when you're going to get rapid innovation. And I'm not sure, other than senior leadership focus, how you get there. You know, bad word, Keynes tried to do that. Yeah, got one laugh. You know, but that's the direction, and we just need to fix what didn't work, but that's the direction.
I'm going to take a step back here for a second. Our most valuable resource are the lieutenants on the submarines, the ships, and the aircraft that are operating in theater right now. When have we ever, at the end of a full combat deployment, brought back representatives from every ship, submarine, and aircraft that flew in a deployment, got them in a room with CNO and his staff, just the lieutenants? How did it work? What did you do to overcome it? How are we going to get, if I told you tomorrow you were going to go fight China, what would you do? Who do we have sorry. I see Mongo. Mongo, congratulations. Your new job. I'm talking to you. And that is, we have got to start leveraging the talent in our fleet differently. They have ideas about how they're overcoming limitations in our current legacy platforms to fight the fight right now. If we can augment that with the technology we just described, we would be in a different place. That's what I would tell myself if I look back.
Nice, nice. All right, Jerry, get real, get better.
I'll go a little bit different direction. On the get real part, I think we have to stress every day that the Chinese don't think like us. They don't respond to words. They only respond to actions. And that's across the board. And the capabilities you're fielding and the way you operate those capabilities. So I think on both fronts, we got to get bolder. I think they don't respect timidity, and so be bold. Don't be reckless. Don't be necessarily provocative, but be bold.
No, very good. Well, let me bring this to a close. So circling back to the panel abstract, the threats are significantly greater than they've ever been, and they're demanding us to reinvent how industry supports the Navy with tomorrow's EW, SIGINT, and cyber. Open architectures and software-based solutions will be mandatory for outpacing these threats. But industry, as you see, is already working together, and together we will help the Navy succeed. I want to thank all of my panelists up here, and certainly all of you for attending this panel. Thanks, and appreciate your attention.